You are listening to the Strength Coach Network podcast, presented by StrengthCoachNetwork.com, where strength coaches come to learn.
What's up, everyone? Welcome to episode number 1 of the Strength Coach Network podcast. If you're listening to this, you're probably familiar with me from my work at rugbystrengthcoach.com. If you're not, my name is Keir Wenham-Flatt. I'm a strength and conditioning coach, primarily known for my work in rugby. And Rugby Strength Coach is still alive and well. If you're a rugby player or rugby coach and you would like to learn more about strength and conditioning specific to that, you can check out rugbystrengthcoach.com and pick up any products or services related to that right there. The reason for the Strength Coach Network podcast is, although my background is primarily in rugby, I've since moved to the USA to work in American football, and I would say my work with other sports is probably more prominent than it is with rugby now, and my kind of interaction with professionals from other sports and my reach to other sports has expanded to the point where it's probably not appropriate for me to put out a podcast under the Rugby Strength Coach name anymore. So what had initially started as the Rugby Strength Coach community is now known as the Strength Coach Network, and that is the education platform that I put together for strength and conditioning professionals to give them access to the resources and the kind of strategy that they need to, one, build their careers, and two, serve their athletes. So that's the reason for the new podcast name and the new branding. And you may have noticed, if you listen to the previous iteration of the podcast, that I've basically been absent for about 2 years. I've really dropped off on putting out materials. So if you were wondering, I just wanted to give you a little bit of background about what it is I've been up to. So at the time that I released my most recent episode of the Rugby Strength Coach podcast, I had just moved to the USA to embark upon my objective of working in the NFL, and I was working at the University of Richmond. And about 7 or 8 months into that process, I had reconnected with a guy named Eric Corum, who was the high performance director, firstly at Kentucky when we first met. Then he was with the Houston Texans in the NFL for a while, and he had just started working as high performance director for the College of William and Mary in Williamsburg in Virginia. And we had met at Track Football Consortium. He had saw my presentation, and he also saw another presentation that I did at Central Virginia Sports Performance Seminar on behalf of my friend Jay DeMayo. And Eric had seen that presentation and basically expressed an interest in me coming to work with him and help him build the high performance project that's ongoing at the College of William and Mary. And it was extremely good timing on his part, because my girlfriend at the time had just got pregnant with our child. So I did not have health insurance at the time, and he was offering health insurance. So that explains the most recent career move. And also the absence from podcasting and publishing. I've been busy preparing to become a parent and being a parent, and I had no idea that children make you so busy, but that's where I've been. Thirdly, I just want to give you a little bit of background into what it is I'm going to be trying to do with the Strength Coach Network podcast. And funnily enough, I'm a sports professional. I work in sports. I work with athletes. I speak to and consult with coaches and different organizations. But the one rule that I've given myself for this podcast is that I will not speak to anyone involved in sport, and I will not speak to coaches. And the reason that I'm going to do that is, in my opinion, the world does not need another strength and conditioning specific podcast. Not to disparage the other podcasts out there. I think they do a great job, and they're a really valuable tool for strength and conditioning coaches to develop their work. But it got to the point with the Rugby Strength Coach podcast where it had got a little bit repetitive for me, asking the same questions, speaking to the same kinds of people. And what really appeals to me is really coming away with new and exciting information or ideas that light a fire underneath me as a coach, and to have really meaningful conversations that kind of spur me onto learning new things. So to that end, I'm only going to speak to people that I think do really interesting and really thought-provoking work in fields that lie outside of strength and conditioning. Because when I reflect on my own career, some of the most impactful lessons and most meaningful changes I've undergone in my coaching career do not relate to the science or the sets or the reps. It's much more about the governing principles and the ideas and the relationships and the human factor that has made the difference for me. So that's basically going to be the criteria for the guests and the content moving forward. My hope is that you listen to these conversations, that you're able to take the information presented within them and view it through your own lens, use your own intelligence and draw your own conclusions to learn lessons that are applicable to your role, your sport, your field. To that end, today's episode, the first in the series, is going to be with, as you'll see, an unnamed Special Operations Forces soldier. The reason for him being unnamed and no details being given is that this particular individual is actually an active duty soldier, and I wanted to speak to him for a variety of different reasons. The first is obviously that Special Operations Forces in the military is a topic that has a lot of mystique and a lot of aura built up around it within sport preparation, particularly in America. There seems to be the idea, mostly due to the media, that the military have a certain way of doing things, and that is the reason that they succeed, and that if we just copy that in sport, we too will succeed. And there doesn't seem to be a lot of critical thought that goes into stealing those methods and hoping that they work. So that was one reason that I wanted to speak to this guy. He also has a fantastic background, both as a high-level college athlete and as a coach, because the discourse, when you point out to a lot of people in sport that perhaps the methods used in special operations selection and training may not be applicable to sport, is, well, you have no idea about sport, or you have no idea about special operations. So I wanted to speak to someone that had a real good experience of all three of those areas, with a foot in each camp, to be able to speak to that and what value may be taken from one area to another. And lastly, I just wanted to speak to this guy because when you think about special operations in the military, it's such a high stakes, high pressure environment with extremely stringent selection. And those are naturally areas which I think are overlooked within sport, and we have a lot of lessons that we can potentially learn to benefit our organizations in high performance sport. If you've enjoyed this episode of the podcast, make sure you check out strengthcoachnetwork.com. This is a one-stop shop that is designed to help you take your career to the next level and to better serve your athletes and your organization. We have over 200 hours and counting of video educational lectures presented by world-class practitioners. Whatever the topic is or the sport that you come from, you are going to find something for you at Strength Coach Network. Inside our exclusive members forum, you're also going to be able to discuss topics within strength and conditioning and high performance sport, to get your programs and your ideas critiqued, and to ask questions with members from all over the world at every level of sport, from the Olympics, the NFL, the NBA, English Premier League soccer, professional rugby union, Major League Baseball, on down. Not only this, but you're also going to be able to ask career-related questions and get advice on how to network, apply for jobs, prepare for interviews, and be strategic in how you advance your career. So whether you're an aspiring coach, climbing the ladder, or heading up your own department at the highest level of professional sport, check us out at strengthcoachnetwork.com, where you can sample the entire site for just $1 for 24 hours, risk-free. If you like the site, just keep it. If you don't, you can cancel immediately with no strings attached. Okay, so we just set off air. No names, no geographical locations, no specifics. So respecting those boundaries, how would you describe what it is you do for people listening to this podcast?
So I work with the tactical community. a specific community that is unique in its own way because a lot of it is self-reliance on each other. A lot of it is uh, being around people that are the best in their field. Uh, and I'm just one of the pieces to that. I'm not, special in any way. I'm just surrounded by extraordinary people. Having a background in athletics as well as coaching and strength and conditioning, I've had a unique opportunity to uh, get a little bit of perspective on the types of physical and mental demands that go into the job. And through that, I've been able to uh, not only be a friend to these guys, but also be able to kind of coach them up and help them to become the best that they can be. Because the better they are, the better we are. And
Yeah.
so it's kind of like its own family.
So, you know, again, without specifics, you're a member of the United States military. It would obviously be an aspect of the military that everybody has heard of, that's considered very, very elite, very selective in who they work with. So if we go back to right to the start, you mentioned a couple of things there. What was it that gave you the desire to go down this road and end up where you have? Did you have any aspirations growing up to be a member of the military?
Honestly, no. Uh, my family didn't have any real relationship or anything direct with the military. I had a couple uncles and stuff like that, but nothing that was intimate to my immediate family. Uh,
Mm,
I didn't really have any friends that had it either. It was not something that I probably would have considered myself doing back at a young age. I was an athlete growing up, man. I love sports. I played all kinds of sports, and so as far as the military goes, uh, yeah, it was never something that was pre-planned, predetermined, or I never had any pressure to do it. Honestly, I probably had the opposite of that from several of my family members.
yeah. So you were a high level athlete in college, and is it around that time that you're in college that you decide, well, this is the path that I want to take now, and is it just a natural extension of that competitive mindset that you've had up until then?
Yes, I think that was one of the major driving points. I was fortunate enough to get to play at a higher level, and when that time was over, I think that a lot of athletes kind of get it. It's almost kind of like a I don't depression is too strong of a word, but it kind of like
Mm,
you get just the blues almost for being around like-minded people with a common goal, and you want to be part of that team. And so I had a couple people that showed up in my life at the time that I was not expecting them to have the impact that they did, and helped me just kind of open up opportunities to different routes. And the military was one of those routes that at first I wasn't super sold on, but I kind of got more or less bit by the bug. And I don't have like a black and white, this is my why, because a why is like a big deal in the military. Most selection courses across all three branches, the instructors want to know your why. They want to get inside your head and know that. And honestly, it was more of a feeling than a why. And at first, that kind of made me uneasy because I couldn't speak to it. And if couldn't speak to it, then in my mind, how much did I actually believe that? But
mm,
as I started to go through some of these selection courses, the guys that I got around, a lot of them had the similar type of mindset. It was more of a intrinsic feeling that you had. It was just something that you couldn't get rid of. It was kind of all encompassing, and it was something that you just felt like you had to try, at least try to do. And that's kind of what pushed me in that direction.
so obviously we'll get to the detail of selection a little bit later, but was there anything that you felt that your background as an athlete, training, being competitive, that had prepared you well for selection? Or if you had your time again, is there anything that you feel you really missed out prior to selection that was a gap that should have been filled?
Honestly, I would say that I did nothing particularly well. I was decently well-rounded in pretty much all the aspects that are kind of required of you as far as the running, the calisthenics, and stuff like that. Coming from the background that I had, I didn't have a tremendous aerobic base. I didn't have a lot of miles on my legs. I really didn't do that much body weight stuff. I prided myself on strength as far as how much I could bench press or power clean or among those things. So uh, it was a lot of hard work. It took a long time. It was a very drawn out process that I was fortunate enough to get a lot of help from strength coaches throughout that I had in college, and through their guidance, I definitely developed some of these things that are needed. I ran a lot. I had to lose a lot of weight, and but there was nothing that I would say that when I showed up the first day, I would say that I was leaps and bounds better than anybody else. And if I could go back, honestly, there's not a whole lot that I think that changing would have done. I think that with the people around me and how much they invested into me, I had the best opportunity to do that type of training uh, with the amount of time that I had.
Yeah. So did you graduate and then immediately go into that process, or was it a period of time where you made those changes that you described and then you kind of enlisted and began that process?
Yeah. By the time I got done playing football, uh, it was probably 9 months till I went to go see just the recruiter,
Hmm.
not any kind of special recruiter for any other form of advanced operations or anything. Just a regular run of the mill recruiter. And in those 9 months, uh, that's where I did a majority of a lot of weight loss. Honestly, a lot of garbage miles on my legs, a lot of running, but I didn't have a kind of a clear direction. My thought process was I need to get my body ready in the right shape before I could even start to try to get more specific and train. I need to do as much just general prep possible. And after about 6 months of that, um, that's when I actually ran into a former strength coach that I had, and he kind of took me under his wing. And from there, that's when I've really started to make strides uh, through his programming and his kind of direction that he had. We were able to really hone in on some of the things that I was lacking, and
Mm.
and we really capitalized on a lot of that. And like I said, without some of those guys, it'd be really hard to say where I would have been come day one.
Yeah. So, I mean, you arrived day one for this selection process. There's obviously a lot of people that want to do what you do, and not a lot of people end up making it that far. When you look back on that process and you look around on day one, are there any guys where you thought on day one, like, Jesus, like this guy is just a lock to make it, and didn't make it, and vice versa? Were there people that just really surprised you, and you look around at the end, they're still there, and you're like, wow.
Yeah, yeah, definitely. Usually in the beginning, everyone is pretty much uh, characterized by their physical abilities. So you go for a run and you see the fastest guys. You do your calisthenics. You see who are guys throwing up the craziest numbers, and based on first appearances, there are some of those guys that look like physical studs, and some of them lived up to it. Some of them really didn't. There's some guys that were very unassuming that were able to crush miles, crush pull-ups, do all the things that were demanded of them throughout the whole course of training. Uh, but what you didn't really see, because in the beginning, it's kind of a shock and awe effect. You don't really know what's coming. You might honestly, you're kind of just trying to stay alive there. It's you're nervous, you're scared, you're stressed, you think everyone's out to get you. So in the beginning, you're kind of looking out for yourself for the most part. You have a slight, coming from a sports background such as I did and several other guys did. You do have those team qualities, and the strength of what you can do in a team and stuff like that. But uh, you're kind of alone, and so over time you learn to develop and develop friendships with these people. You see the type of characters they have, and once I kind of got to that point a little later on in training, I found out that a lot of the guys that I knew were locks. That's when I kind of figured out who was a lock and who probably wasn't. A lot of the guys were very intrinsically motivated. They didn't have to be told twice what to do. They were going to give it all they had the very first opportunity. Most of them, learning their backgrounds of becoming friends with these guys, they were generalists. They were well-rounded guys. If they played sports as a background, they played a lot. They played a lot of different things. Some of them ran track and played football, or they did basketball and baseball. There wasn't one specific type of person that was going to make it. And
Yeah.
honestly, one of the funnier things that I took away was that a lot of these guys that made it they had great senses of humor, which is kind of a weird thing, and it's not something that you would think that would be driving you to make it. But I mean, if you have a guy that can look at something super hard, or if you're in a terrible situation and you can laugh about it, that just goes to show the type of control you have over your mind. And a lot of like I said, it's weird. A lot of the guys that I see on a daily basis that are guys that I went through training with, we had some of the funniest times of our lives, and so that's something that I would definitely say is be able to have a sense of humor, be able to shift from turning it on to be able to turn off your mind, and yeah.
What percentage of people that did not make it through the end would you attribute to those that quit versus those that were dropped purely because they were not able to hit the required standards?
You usually see it was hard for me to put in a specific percentage. You usually see guys that quit in the beginning. Towards the beginning, they don't really know what to expect. Like I said a little earlier, kind of like that shock and awe factor that you have going in. Uh, those guys, they get overwhelmed and they quit, and it's usually before some type of event, whether you're going for a ruck or you're doing a run or something, or there's some big training event going on. It's usually right before, right after you see those guys kind of quit. The guys that just don't have it physically, honestly, some of those guys are some of the hardest guys I've ever met too, because they gave everything they had, and it just wasn't enough at that time. Maybe they needed to train a little more prior to coming in, or whatever the case may be. But some of those guys, you could see them putting out every time they had the opportunity to put out. Uh, those guys usually made it farther on into training. Like I said, the more you get into training, the more you kind of get to see people's character and who they are. And so some of those guys were really good guys that just didn't quite have what it took. But I would say I don't know. It's probably more so. There's probably more guys that quit because they get overwhelmed than guys get weeded. Guys kind of getting weeded out because they're weak. There's so much information out now across every different pipeline of selections that the standards that are required of you, and if you show up not prepared for those, then that's a different story. That's kind of on you.
Interesting. So you alluded to it a little bit before, and perhaps one of the misconceptions will be that those who serve in the special forces are just robots that are unaffected by situations like that. But you already mentioned, fear and stress and anxiety. in general terms, throughout that selection process, what would you describe as the situation where you experienced the most amount of fear and self-doubt? And was there anything in particular that allowed you to overcome that at the time?
I mean, there were several times where I was definitely thinking that I wasn't going to make it. Uh, it's usually in any kind of event where you either can't foresee the end, or you are in a position where you can't rely on your buddies to help you. So you're alone, or it's just an unending thing. And the way that you kind of overcome that is you have to kind of have to set short term goals. You have to, whether if it's an untime or if it's a timed run but unknown distance, for example, like you don't know how far you're going, but you know you just have to go, and somebody's gonna eventually tell you to stop, and you either make the distance that you're supposed to make or you don't. And with that, that might just be a turn in the road up ahead or something like that. You keep your worlds as small as you can, and then once you get there, you set another short goal. The guys that are long term focused in a pipeline like any of the ones that our military provide, those are the guys that are going to end up kind of getting weeded out, and that's where the stress kind of becomes overwhelming. You can't you can't look at the whole thing and try to take it all on by yourself. You have to take on small pieces every time, and eventually those things become little victories, and you build up enough of those little victories, and that's where you're going to develop mental toughness. You're going to develop confidence in yourself, and before you know it, you're going to start to see a light at the end of the tunnel.
Yeah, I heard somebody say before that his goal was always to get to the next meal.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
That's
What would
a
you
good
say?
one.
Oh, sorry. Yeah. What would you say the biggest misconceptions are regarding special operations selection? Like people have ideas about how it is, and then the reality is completely different.
Uh, I think that guys think that only some. I've heard that some guys are just the freaks of nature that go there, or guys that are the top athletes. You usually watch the Army Navy game or something like that, and you see like an Army guy going to Green Beret selection and a Navy guy going to SEALs. Uh, but I can guarantee you that I was not a freak of nature going into training. And there's a lot of guys like that I know that there's nothing special about them, but it's just their desire to not quit. And they're one of the biggest things that I also see is that I think that, and this kind of has more so to leading up to selection and selection itself, is guys treat their training prior to going to selection like selection. So they're spending 6 months to a year out training for this pipeline, whatever it is, and they're spending every day going absolutely as hard as they can, burning themselves out, never recovering, and then they get to that that pipeline, whatever it is, and now you have to do all those things, but now you have some instructor screaming at you, telling you that you're not worth anything, and they break down, and their bodies aren't able to recover from the impact and the stress that they put on it for the last year. And now you're at your game day. Like, it would be like going full pads every day for football and then playing on Saturday and expecting to be at your top game.
Yeah.
So that's only going into training one of the biggest things that I've seen as well.
No, you mentioned football. Particularly in American football, there appears to be a culture of trying to borrow ideas from what people perceive to be effective training in special operations and then applying those ideas to sporting situations. Would you say, or to what extent can those kind of activities prepare an athlete for elite sport and vice versa? To what extent was your experience as an athlete in competition preparing you for the selection process?
I think that being an athlete, for me, it was like I told you, I didn't, you know, I didn't run a lot going in before. I played a position where I didn't have to move very much. It wasn't a strenuous thing. So I was very specialized to what I did in sport. I think that special operations are more like, I think they're the king of generalists, because I think that these people have to be able to sprint but also be able to run for a long time. They have to be able to lift heavy things but also carry moderate things a long way. They have to be able to do all this while constantly playing that game with their heart and their stress levels to keep their heart rate from not spiking, because they also have to be critical thinkers, and they can't go over the top in a moment. They have to be able to be calm themselves down. So when I see people trying to take things from the tactical community and apply it to athletics, it's apples and oranges to me, particularly. If you're trying to do it to get some kind of mental toughness or aspect, you see some stuff like that going on. It's not a dog and pony show, and I think that when they get some group to come out and lead their team through something, uh, I honestly don't see a ton of benefit in that. Uh, I don't think that is what's going to get the athletes to come together as a team, which is usually what the point of those things are.
Yeah, and to execute what they do under the pressure of competition, right?
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah. So to that extent, the stuff that people would deem typical in special operations selection, so basically endless calisthenics, just running an insane amount, MFing people in their face, laying down in the sea. To what extent do you feel that develops mental toughness that actually applies to your ability to do your job versus weeding out those who do not want to be there?
I think it does both. I think that doing these things and accomplishing them, like we kind of talked about earlier, are those kind of small victories, whether, like you said earlier, it's getting to that next meal, or if it's, breaking up this 10-mile run into mile segments and you win every mile. I think that building those things up can build mental toughness, but I also think mental toughness is one of those things where if you have to tell somebody you have it, you don't have it. It's not something that is a quantifiable trait to me. It's your ability to look at a situation and not become overwhelmed with it. And despite whatever circumstances might come up during that situation, you're able to take a step back, think about it critically, and solve whatever problem needs to be solved. You're not always given that luxury of time, but getting those building blocks on top of each other and those small victories, I think, are what build mental toughness the most. In most pipelines, there's a kind of a progression, a crawl, walk, run, or whatever you want to call it, to the type of stress that they put on you. So when you go to a pipeline, they usually have increasing standards for runs, for whatever, for the amount of push-ups or pull-ups or rucks you have to do. And usually the first one you do is not ever going to be the hardest. So during those, as you challenge yourself with those first initial runs, rucks, whatever the case may be, and you pass them and you feel more confident in yourself, you're able to take on those next ones. Guys that fail those first couple, if they're still around towards the end, if you can't pass the easier ones, I mean, it's very easy to get overwhelmed doing the bigger ones. Something that kind of stuck with me, a way that I kind of like to compartmentalize it, is we've heard you either train to win or you try not to lose. Like, you either play to win or play not to lose. Well, playing to win for something like that, it doesn't mean that, let's say we have 10 guys and we're all going out to do a run, and we're doing a 5-mile run and you have to do it in 40 minutes. That first guy might be a former marathon runner and he crushes that thing in like 30 minutes, whatever. That's probably a little too fast, but
Yeah.
he crushes it. So, and let's say I finish in 39 minutes and 59 seconds. I passed by 1 second. Well, some people might say, all right, this guy just played not to lose. He barely passed it. But to that person, he might have won. And because he took it, he kept his world so small that he knew in the back of his head he wasn't going to beat the guy up front, and that's fine. But the selection is not about you always beating that first person. It's about you beating yourself in the mind games that you play with yourself in those situations. So if I win and I beat that time, that it that gives me confidence, and that makes me more likely to take on the next one. So that's a little bit extreme example, but you keep doing these things where you keep winning, you keep telling yourself you're winning, and those small victories build up, and that's definitely something I saw a lot of the guys do that were able to keep their world very small and take things one step at a time. And by the end of it, there's nothing that was stressing them out. They were able to pretty much take on anything head on.
So, in terms of management of stress or the ability to perform under pressure, do you find that it can be somewhat situation specific? So you'll have guys where you put them under pressure and say you have to achieve X distance in this time, and they'll be like quite comfortable with that task, but then maybe you put them in the water, or you stop them breathing a little bit, or there's some other kind of psychological stress. Do you find that there are guys that are universally tough from situation to situation, or everybody has strengths and weaknesses?
I think everybody has strengths and weaknesses, and I think the pipelines, uh, whether it involves water, whether it involves rucking, whether it involves all the pipelines kind of all do the same stuff mixed around a little bit and depending on length and duration. Uh, but the pipelines are designed to make you find your weakness. And so there's guys that are great at running that are terrible at rucking or terrible at the calisthenics, or if you put them in water, they freak out. And there's some guys that are not as good physically, but maybe they know they've just had a more stressful life. They've taken on more in their life, and they're able to calm back down when things get overwhelming.
So it's fair to say that everybody is probably going to get exposed and forced to face a weakness during that selection process.
Absolutely, that's like I said, that's what they're designed to do. If you don't, I mean, you might be that lucky guy that just the stars aligned and the way you were brought up, the things you did prior to entering just matched up with whichever pipeline you decided to go through. But also, I mean, it's not the pipeline is just that. It's just the longest tryout of your life. Once you get through that, then you're going to be opened up to a whole real world of stresses and things that you're going to have to take on that, maybe being an all-state runner plus you did weightlifting plus gymnastics, like whatever you did prior that just helped you physically crush this pipeline isn't necessarily always going to make sure that or allow you to crush some of the things that you don't have control over.
Yeah. So, I mean, hypothetically speaking, if, you decide, well, the water is an issue for you, how is it that you get rid of that weakness? Are there certain things that you can do, or is it just repeated progressive exposure to the situation that you find most difficult?
I would definitely say it's repeated exposure. Kind of like we said with the crawl, walk, run. I think it's incremental exposure. So I think that you start very small and you do what you can, and then you slowly build on that until you can develop confidence in really whatever you're doing, whatever that is. There's going to be times where you're going to be overwhelmed and your heart's going to be racing, your thoughts are going to be racing, and through the work that you've done and the confidence you've built and those small mental victories that you've had, learning to bring your thoughts back, bring your heart rate down a little bit, get very task oriented on what you have to do. Go as slow as you can talk. Think as slow as you can talk. If you're freaking out and whatever it is, I know I've heard water's a big one. I know that some guys do it with jumping out of airplanes or through like the airborne kind of stuff. Or I know I know that a lot of the advanced training that you do past the physical side of it, more the tactical side of it, is probably more stressful than any kind of physical test they'll do, because now you have people watching every movement you make and grading you based on that. And it's something that you're not familiar with. If you struggle in the water, and you know growing up you struggle in the water, or you're terrified of heights and anything like that freaks you out, you can you can do enough of that uh, prior to entering selection that is gonna build you up as much as you possibly can up to that point. But some of the things that you don't know, when you're presented with a way to do something, and that's the first time you've ever heard of it, and now you have to go out and do it in a very stressful environment, that's where a lot of the stress comes into play.
Yeah. So one kind of notion in sport that persists is the idea of like a gamer, or someone who will rise to the occasion and suddenly just play, way better than they ever have because of the size of the occasion. My personal belief is that's a little bit bullshit, and we're always probably going to do it better under conditions of low stress than we will on the highest stage. In my experience in sport, you never get guys that say, "Well, I wish I'd just been a little bit more aroused or psyched up for the big event."
Mm-hmm.
Do you think that's true in the military, where it's not so much rising to the occasion, but you're always going to fall back a little bit to the level of the training? So the training has to be of a sufficiently high quality that you can try and get as close to that as possible.
Yeah, I completely agree with that you follow your training. There's not much that I've ever seen where somebody did something that we've never seen before, or that you very rarely find yourself saying, "Oh, I didn't know he had that in him." Maybe the very first day when you're just judging people based on physical characteristics, like this guy's 250 pounds, and then you realize that he can run a 5-minute mile or something. But
Yeah.
usually when any kind of situation like that presents itself, it's usually because I misjudged the person prior to that. I didn't think they had it in them, but I had no idea what their background was, and then they came out and did something that was what I was not expecting. But when in our game like situations, if that's kind of what you want to call it, most of the time it is guys falling back on their level of training, and any other time it's them falling farther back because of stress or whatever's going on.
Yeah.
The guys that are the best at what they do master the basics, and they're able to raise their training level higher than anybody else because they have such a good foundation in the basics that they can start adding small things. So when they're performing and they're falling back on their training, their level of training is much higher.
So if the best performers are those that are going to experience the smallest difference between their best day and what they actually do.
Yeah, that I would definitely agree with that. I think that guys that the guys that are the best are the guys that don't have off days. Because everything has become habitual to them, because their level of mastery in the basics is higher than anybody else's. And most of the guys that go on to any kind of tier one program, uh, the reason why they do it is because they're the best at the basics in their field, in their community. And nobody is looking for the guy that's trying to go out and be Jason Bourne or something like that. They're going out there and trying to find guys that are trainable and already have a huge bandwidth of knowledge that they can slowly start to add little things here and there to help them reach that next level. But if you don't have that foundation, you're going to fall off, and it's really hard to try to rise up to any kind of performance like that.
Yeah. So just as an aside, what's interesting to me is you mentioned habit. is there a process that you go through mentally to develop those habits? Or is there anything that you think stands out of like guys that are more effective in forming the appropriate habits to achieve what you talked about?
I think that guys that develop those habits, I think part of it has to do with how they're raised, their backgrounds. I think guys that habitually are just trustworthy, like accountable, those kind of guys were for the most part raised that way. There's not much that changes as far as the habits that people make in training. Uh, Usually, if you show up and you're the guy that wants to try to get out early, the guy that doesn't really want to work that hard, the guy that's you know not not putting taking care of his own stuff before he takes care of the group stuff. Uh, those guys, you spot them pretty quickly, and usually those guys didn't grow up in a team sport environment where they had other people depending on them, or they grew up with uh, just some kind of dysfunction going on. Not all the time. I know guys that have come from broken families that are some of the best dudes that I've ever met. I'm not trying to say anything like that,
Yeah.
but just I think that background kind of has a lot to do with it, and it's it's almost it's almost kind of like second nature to some guys. Some guys just always do the right thing, and you sit there and wonder like, what's up with these guys, and that's kind of why some of these pipelines produce just outstanding guys of character, is just because these people that have habits of just being just great men of great character. They kind of get drawn to serve in the way, the highest way they think possible. And so I don't know if that exactly answered your question, but
Well, it's just interesting because one of the external viewpoints that I've had about environments like you work in is obviously elite organizations are elite organizations regardless of what they do, and understandably sport is going to want to try and steal from other successful organizations to apply to their own environment. And I always wonder to what extent it becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy with these special operations, because is it that they only select people with the habits and characteristics that you described, or their processes are such that they develop individuals? And I always wonder how applicable one may be to the other when you don't have the luxury in sport of being so selective in who you bring on board because of the competition between institutions, and the fact that you don't necessarily have the captive audience in sport that you do in the military, where you can be not abusive, but highly confrontational with individuals, and you've still got them.
yeah, I think that guys that are drawn to that uh, to the military, it's more of a walk on kind of vibe than a scholarship, because what I've noticed is that, like, you guys, college coaches go out, they recruit those players to come in, they want those players to come in. Those players, some guys might instantly love the coach, love that, and it works out perfectly. But I mean, you always see every year on ESPN, the top 10 guys, 10 hats in front of them, and I mean, those coaches don't know who he's going to pick. Uh, but with the military, it's more of like that walk on that's trying to join the team. He might not have gotten a fair shake in high school, didn't get recruited, and now he's busting his butt every summer trying to get ready for a tryout. And he wants to go to that college. That college doesn't necessarily want him, and that's kind of the environment that some of these pipelines are. I mean, they don't there's military recruiters and stuff like that, and like the higher ups, they want certain numbers, and that's fine. But the when you get there, the people that are leading your class and whatever phase of training you're in make it very apparent that they don't need you there. It's not their lives are not dependent on you. the success of their program is not dependent on you, because at the end of the day, if they let you through, they're accountable for that.
Yeah.
And so that's why some of these vetting processes and why some of the confrontational stuff in the military and, the just how hard some of these pipelines can be is because they're trying to break you down as much as they can, because they want to see who the true person is underneath all of that, underneath all the work you brought in to try to become, some kind of, just join the tactical community, all the running, all the whatever you did, all the things your parents just like ingrained in you and your kid. They break all that away, and they want to see who you are at your core. And if that's somebody that they want to work with, then they're going to help build you back up. But at the end of the day, you could be working with some of these people that put you through training later on. Some of them are retired or whatever. I mean, it's not a great chance, but you could, or they would know somebody that you would work with. And so that's kind of like a very, some of the guys don't treat it like this because they'd rather, be doing other things, but it's a pretty sacred job where, you're kind of at the forefront of who's getting in and who's getting out. And so once they break you down and they start to question who you are, you kind of start to see who in your class, the people around you see if they're, a we versus me kind of guy. Are they that walk on that just wants to go onto the team just to get the gear and leave? Because I've seen those. Or are they the guy that's going to stay there late, watch film, even if he's on just the practice squad? He's doing everything he can to make himself better. The cool part about some of these pipelines that, not every college does is that, that type of mentality, if you have the physical characteristics, usually gets rewarded. You usually make it through if you see a guy with that much determination, that much intrinsic motivation. Where, sometimes in college those guys, they might not make it. They might do everything they can and they still quite don't have enough. And that's kind of what we touched on a little bit earlier with some of the guys that, like you said, they give it their all. They just didn't quite have what it took to make it. But for the most part, there's been a big change in the kind of people that have been coming into these pipelines. It used to be who's the baddest guy on the block, who's the fastest, who's the strongest, who's gotten in the most bar fights, because we want guys that are just aggressive. But they've learned that, and I've actually seen colleges kind of shift towards this as well, is we can train the physical characteristics, but for some of these guys, you can't train the habitual person they are, who they are. And so some coaches, I've seen it, they make a stand. We're like, hey, we're not recruiting any more assholes. And it's kind of the same thing. If you're an asshole, you're probably not going to make it through that pipeline, especially nowadays. They've made a switch to where they want good people, and we'll make them good operators, whatever. Same thing with sports. We want good people, and we'll make them good players. And if you can't do that, then why are you teaching them? Let's find somebody else that can.
Yeah, it's as you were talking, I was thinking about institutions that are successful or that I personally admire, and they have that appropriate balance between, well, we're going to recruit you and we really want you to come here, but there's still that velvet rope of, if you don't want to be here, cool. And they are willing to accept a temporary hit to get rid of that person and maybe put in the second string guy that does want to be there and does have the character, because they know that it may be a temporary hit, but in the long run, the organization is going to be served better by having those individuals, rather than turning a blind eye to the superstar guy that has those flaws. Because in my mind, it's just a problem that is pushed further down into the future. You're still going to have to deal with it, and it's still going to rear its head later on.
Yeah, absolutely agree with that. And like I said, there's definitely parallels in the military. There's guys that do it for the wrong reasons. There's guys that as soon as they graduate their pipeline, within a year or so, they're already kicked out of their community because they do things that don't reflect well in their community. They don't wear whatever insignia, whatever they have, with pride. They wear it for self motivating reasons that are going to help increase their status in some way or another. And you get rid of, you just put all this time and effort into them, but the military's pretty good about getting rid of those guys because these pipelines, they're a never-ending machine, man. They pump out even in the worst situations, even when numbers are super low, whatever it is, Christmas, whatever the time of the year is, these machines are pumping out very highly motivated guys. And if you've been in and you've made it through your pipeline, you're at whatever branch in the military you're at, and you're not living up to the expectation that you had in those pipelines to do the job, you'll get replaced, and they'll thank you for your service, and they'll show you the door. Because at the end of the day, especially in some of the positions these guys are at, we need guys that do the job right and that have the type of character that people want to emulate. Most of these guys that come right out of these pipelines, they look, because they've been looking up to the people that have been leading them through these pipelines. Their teachers, their instructors, whatever they are. They've been looking up to these guys for months, and now they get out, and now they try to kind of naturally gravitate towards that next kind of person that can help kind of guide them, be their role model. I mean, it was the same way for a lot of athletes that I've coached in the past and that I've seen. They come in as a freshman and they look for that role model because they're new there. They don't know the ropes. And if you hitch your wagon to somebody that is of high character, your life's going to improve. You're gonna stay. You're gonna go that extra mile, just like that guy did. But if you hitch your wagon to somebody that cuts corners, doesn't want to be there, has other people do stuff that he should be doing, that's where you're going to end up doing those same things.
Interesting. So you mentioned a little bit physically, but in terms of decision making, you work in an environment where you have to be able to quickly make decisions with extremely high stakes. So it could literally be like a life or death decision. How do you develop the skills or the what is the process that enables you to do that and to be a member of a team where you have to be able to process and make decisions very, very quickly? Is it more like the physical stuff where you said it's like a crawl, walk, run, or how do you do that?
It's definitely a crawl, walk, run type of mentality. You start at the lowest skill level that you can for the lowest common denominator in your group. So even if you just come in and somebody's naturally a little bit better at something, but somebody else isn't, you're still going to start where everyone is at that same level. You're going to start slow. You're going to start in a low stress environment, as low stress as you can make it for whatever you're doing, and you're gonna practice, and you're gonna keep going. You're gonna keep going, and you're gonna make a ton of mistakes, and then over the course of time, you're gonna learn from these mistakes, and then you're gonna slowly start to master some of these very low level basic things. But in order to keep progressing, when you go to something a little bit more advanced, now those basics that you've already learned before, there's not going to be a lot of room for error on those basics. You've learned them. You've shown that you can do them competently. You've shown them, in a low stress environment. Usually they'll turn up the stress a little bit as you start to get better at those, and then they'll move on to the next step. And now that next step, the same thing, will be a lower stress environment. But if you go and mess up something that you learned on day 1 and it's day 10 now, that's a big deal. But if you mess something up on day 10 that you learned on day 10, it's probably not as big of a deal. And so that's how kind of the training process works, as far as learning, ingraining it, and then slowly adding stress. And a lot of these things are really just the basics of what we do. And so if you're able to be competent at the basics and continue to practice them, because most of the things that we do are, you know, they're perishable skills. So there's never a point where you master the basics and you're good for the rest of your career. So there's plenty of things you can do, and with a lot of these different pipelines and a lot of these different jobs that you get after these pipelines, you're doing several different things, and so it's always hard to kind of stay on top of one thing. I mean similar to training, it would be like trying to train strength, power, speed, endurance, all that at the same time. It's hard to do, but you have to have a good plan to do it. And it's kind of the same thing. You have to be able to train all these things and never get too absorbed into one thing. There's some guys that get too absorbed into like the hand-to-hand combat stuff. Like there's a lot of military members that love like the MMA style because they're like, well, if I ever get into a fight and my gun goes down, I'm gonna beat him up or whatever, or I'm gonna get him in a rear naked. I'm gonna do jujitsu. Well, I don't think you probably want to do jujitsu with. You don't want to ever be rolling around on the ground if you don't have to.
You're gonna pull guard.
Yeah, exactly.
So go on.
ahead.
Sorry.
I was just going to kind of wrap up by saying that there's so many different things that you're always kind of reworking those basics that you've learned. So it's pretty hard to get to those next levels. You have to devote a lot of time and a lot of energy, and that's what makes the professional. That's what makes those guys that are at the top of your peer group the best. Like which guys are the best, and if you look at them behind the scenes, they are doing all the things they have to do to try to cover down on everything they need to, and then they're able to. It makes them better teachers. It makes them better students. They know how to learn as well as teach some of this stuff. Because if some of the times even as like a brand new person out of a pipeline, you might be the subject matter expert on some of the stuff, some new training that's being put out that you just learned. And so you might have a guy that's been part of your group for a while that maybe hasn't done some of this stuff in a while. And so then you're training him. And so the basics are definitely what make or break you as being in the tactical community, because you have so many different things you have to do, and you can't ever kind of let one of them slip.
So you mentioned a couple of times there, and just mentioned it recently, you're likely to experience in such a competitive environment where you're mixing with the best of the best, you are likely to experience a lot of failure and criticism. Are there any strategies that you've been able to develop to, I think in my experience, you can tell me if you disagree, but criticism can sting regardless of who you are and who you work with. It's how do you balance those two things of being, well, they're telling me this for a reason and I need to incorporate it so I don't make the same mistake again, but also being able to let it, put it down and move on, because you mentioned guys that have tremendous sense of humor. Presumably that helps.
Yeah, that's huge to be able to have that. Honestly, some of the worst criticism I ever received was more of an athlete than it was being in the tactical community.
Wow.
Some of the stuff that you see in some of the videos and YouTube, if you YouTube any one of these pipelines and stuff like that, you're going to have instructors and you're going to have guys that are going to be screaming down your throat. They're going to be criticizing everything you do. Nothing's ever going to be good enough. But at the end of the day, looking at it through a lens of these guys are training me to possibly save their life one day or to save their buddy's life. You realize the seriousness of the job that they have, and when they get on you, you never take it personal. It's I've had people that have screamed at me, screamed down my throat, and then the next day I thought they hated me, and they would say what's up. It's everybody messes, especially once you get, so let's say past some of these pipelines, like I said, the first couple phases, whatever you want to call it, weeks of these pipelines, they're meant to get in. They're meant to yell at you for no reason. Any
Mm.
boot camp, go watch a Marine Corps boot camp video, and you'll see that in the first 5 seconds. That's a different thing. That's part of it. That's part of just getting you stressed out, and they just want to get you to stress as fast as possible. The criticism that you see is at least the criticism I'd rather highlight is the criticism you see after the pipelines once you're in your job and you're out training. And that kind of criticism comes from people that are usually your peers or equivalent, and they're people that want to see you do better. I've rarely found people in these communities that, and I've worked with pretty much all of them, that criticize just to feel superior or to make you feel like shit. Most of them
Yeah.
don't do that. Most of them are trying to teach you something that they probably messed up in the past, and they want you to learn from it. And some of these things are mistakes that guys have made, in real life that have cost a lot. And they're things that we'd never want to see again. And they're different because these things are always changing, based on, obviously what things, procedures, tactics, whatever in Vietnam are much different than what they were in Iraq. And so a
Yeah.
lot of these things change. And so with those things that change, we're constantly learning. And by constantly learning, you're constantly getting guys that are going to mess up. And you have to have tough skin. This isn't a community for people that get their feelings hurt and for people that let emotions get the best of them. If you made it through that pipeline, you probably showed the ability to be able to control your emotions, control your stress, and not let things get too overwhelming on the inside. So when someone criticizes you, you kind of take a step back and look at it objectively. You realize, for most of the time when you're getting criticized, you did mess up. Now, there's a couple times where maybe they saw something they didn't see and they yell at you, and it really wasn't your fault. But if you try to talk back to somebody that is in a higher position than you are in the military, it's never going to work for you. It's always going to be bad. So
Yeah.
it's better to just keep your mouth shut. And like everyone's gonna mess up, and so there. I've seen guys that are much older that have made mistakes that guys that just get out of the pipeline make in certain situations, and it's kind of like we talked about. It's some guys not covering down on all those basics that they need. Uh, but criticism is just part of the job. Like I said, for the most part, across pretty much every branch, it's every time I've seen it, it's been constructive for the most part. I mean, yeah, you might throw a couple backhanded comments in there. People get pissed, they get mad, they want to get their point across. But usually, at the end of the day, you're gonna do some kind of debrief. You're gonna talk about how things went, and that would be your opportunity to you can kind of get clarification on some of the things. Everyone's calmed down by then. If you messed up and somebody screamed at you, and then afterwards you kind of you get that little meeting going on, you get that little debrief going on, and that's usually when things are calmer. They're going to explain to you why you messed up, how to fix it, and usually offer help. I've very rarely seen people just clam up, take their ball, and go home, and they don't want to be part of it anymore.
So it's you have to come up with a corresponding plan to make sure it doesn't happen next time.
Yeah, exactly. If you keep failing, then that just goes to show kind of the person that you are. If you're somebody that keeps making mistakes, either you're really not getting it, or so if you're really not getting it, then we need to go take a step back down, go do something a little easier, a little less stressful, and work on, if it's a mechanics thing or if it's a whatever it is, get those mechanics right, teach your body how to do it the right way, and then do it. If we got pissed at everybody for who did a power clean that looked like crap, and we never broke down the actual exercise and showed them how to do each specific part and train it the way that we pretty much every coach trains like Olympic lifts, breaking them into segments, then you can't get pissed at a guy for only yelling at him because he does a bad power clean and never showing him how to do the lift.
Yeah.
But if you show him how to do the lift and this guy's still messing it up, then that kind of shows, well, maybe he doesn't really care. If he doesn't really care, then we got a much bigger problem.
Interesting. So obviously your job is one in which ultimately there's going to be a lot of violence, because that's basically like the military is you're using violence to defend your country or achieve its strategic goals. Is there ever a situation where uncontrolled violence or aggression is warranted, or is there always a conscious effort to pull back somewhat and be deliberate and managed in how you apply aggression? Because again, to grind my own axe, there appears in sport to be a lot of value, in my opinion, misplaced on just getting as psyched up as you can and be as aggressive as you can, rather than to manage that. I was speaking to a guy the other day who's currently going through selection for AFSOC, and he said when they were being taught to clear a room, it was like never faster than a walk, because you have to be able to pull back and manage that aggression, even though you're being extremely violent in the moment.
Yeah, I think what he said is spot on. Don't go faster than you think, and that usually that is more for training, when he's probably saying, don't go faster than a walk.
Yeah.
There's gonna be times where you don't want to walk, you want to run,
Yeah.
but it's always controlled. You never want to get too aroused or too worked up to the point where you can't think straight. The ability to critically think and solve problems are kind of the cornerstone of what makes some of these communities what they are, and the reason why they're able to do some of these high profile type of things. If you can't, because things are never going to go according to plan. If you knew exactly how things were going to go every single time, then yeah, get ramped up and just go and just send it and see what happens. Because it's probably going to go exactly how you think it's going to go. But nothing ever goes according to plan. You could spend all the time in the world prepping for it, and something's going to come up, and it's not going to go the way you want it to go. So that's why you can't blindly kind of just be over the top aggressive and shut off all other senses to the world besides just like rage, because you're not going to be able to think straight. And when things do go sideways, you're not going to be able to take that step back and solve that problem on the spot.
So would you say
ahead.
the best problem solvers are those that are not operating at the limit of their aggression and violence?
I would say yes. I think that the people that are able to control it are probably the best. I think the people that are, when violence is warranted and aggression is warranted, I think you have to be able to turn on and off that switch as precisely and as accurately as you can. If things are going south and you just need violence, then you have to be able to know when to turn on that switch. And then when things calm down, you got to know when to take it off. And you have to be able to constantly do that. And you might have to do that several times throughout the course of a training, like training, real world, whatever. But the ability to kind of work that is huge, and that's why you're always you're always kind of stressed by these selection courses. They constantly stress you because they want to see what you're like, and they want to see what you're like under stress. They also want to see what you're like when you're not under stress. They want to see how you're able to dial it back down, and if you're not good at it, that's where you learn how to do it. You're never going to be more stressed consistently than you are in some of these pipelines. And as you learn to be able to control your thoughts, control your heart rate, control your breathing, kind of get everything back to homeostasis, then you know when to turn it up and turn it back down. In sport, I know specifically or personally for me, there was times where, yeah, I completely agree. I had a coach that was very much into just all out rage, violence, just go for it. And what that turned into was a lot of misassignments, set a lot of penalties, things like that that are controllables. That when you are in the red and you can't think straight, you can't control.
Yeah. Do you find I think you've mentioned breath a couple of times. Do you find that to be a central thing for you to flip that switch off and try and bring yourself back down to kind of a baseline?
Yes, I think that I would be lying if I said, I do a programmed or like any kind of like breathing program or anything like that. But I think that if you can control it, and if you can understand the relationship, kind of that, if you're panting and you're just out of it, you can't even breathe, then how do you expect to make a decision? For me, it's kind of a quick litmus test. If I can breathe, then I'm all right. If I can breathe, then I can think. If I can breathe comfortably, then I can think. And if I can think, then personally, I believe that I can solve whatever problem's in front of me. If I can't, if we just got done doing something and I'm out of it and I can't get it together, then I should not be in a position to make a decision that's going to affect not just me, but more importantly, the guy to my left or my right.
Yeah. So just to wind up here and ask a final question. Obviously, it's an extremely high profile, and it sounds like highly rewarding field that you've opted to be a part of. But then, obviously very, very high stakes, high risk. There's a real chance, like you mentioned, that you could be killed doing this job, or injured, seriously injured. How do you come to terms with that, both yourself as an individual and the people that you work around? Is it a case of you must confront it and be at peace with it and get on with the job anyway, or it's a higher purpose, or do you just put it to the back of your mind?
Personally, I would say that I put it to the back of my mind. Fortunately, I haven't really been in any position where that thought was a real possibility. So I haven't really had to stress too much about it. And so there's obviously people that are out there that have been in those situations, and they can speak much better to it than I could. But I try not to let any of that kind of dwell on me. I'm a firm believer in being able to control what you can control, and not really trying to let any of that other stuff get in the way. This job's stressful enough to where you kind of got your hands full most of the time, and you can't have that stuff in the back of your head, or really not in the back of your head, just floating around in there, constantly kind of pestering you. People that have families, people that have kids, that's a different story for those kind of guys, because they're not thinking for one now, they're thinking for several. But even if you don't, you're still always thinking about those guys that you went through, like to your left and to your right, the guys that you went through training with, the guys that you went through your deployments with, because those are the guys at the end of the day that you care more about their life than you do yours. And so for me, like I said, it's not anything that I stress about, I think about. It's more about what can I do right now that's going to help my buddies out, and how can I just be the best teammate that I can possibly be.
That's awesome. So, I mean, this would normally be when I've done podcasts before, I'd say, where can people find you online? But we'll just leave that and say, thank you very much.
Sounds good, man. I appreciate it. Thank you.
Cool.
If you enjoyed this podcast, join us and hundreds of coaches from all over the world at strengthcoachnetwork.com. Inside, you'll get access to hundreds of hours of educational lectures, discussion, career development, and much more.